Hello and what's up everyone, Thunderbob here, and tonight we are going to be talking about Diablo 4, and more specifically, the patch that was just released on July 18th. We're going to talk about, not the entire patch. I don't want this to be an hour-long video where we go line by line through the entire patch. We're really going to be talking about the most important and biggest things that are impacting the entire game. Initially, I thought about doing a video with my favorite changes and my least favorite changes, and with a lot of thought, I couldn't even come up with any changes that I really liked in this patch. So we're going to be talking about my 5 least favorite changes and how it impacts the game. They've made a lot of changes here. They've slowed down the gameplay, also slowed down the leveling experience. They've nerfed almost every build in the game, and not just the best builds. They've nerfed every build without really giving any good alternatives. I've been a PC gamer since the mid-90s, basically. I've played every Diablo game, every Blizzard game. I've been through all of the Diablo patches, expansions, and going back all the way to Diablo 1, I can't think of a patch that has come out for one of these games that has made me want to play the game less than this patch, and that's pretty amazing. So we're going to jump in and talk about my 5 least favorite changes in this patch. Okay. And my first issue is with the experience reward changes they've made. And these issues, they're not in any particular order. This isn't like the top one or my bottom one. This is just the order I wrote them down in when I was thinking about it. And the change here is the bonus experience you get for fighting higher level monsters. Previously, the best way to level was to do nightmare dungeons and fight things that were 3 levels higher than you. Because if you fought something 1 level higher, you got a 15% bonus, 2 levels, a 20%. 3 levels 25, and that was the max. Well, they've nerfed this completely. Now you get 1.5% bonus per level, up to a 10 level difference. That's the max. So right now, if I fight something 3 levels higher, instead of 25%, I'm getting 4.5% bonus, which is basically nothing. It's like having an extra elixir on yourself. Even if you're fighting something 10 levels ahead, you're still getting 10% less experience than you got previously for something only 3 levels ahead. It's just an idiotic change for a game that already took a long time to level. Like, this is a game that's predicated on seasons. They want you to make new characters every season. They encourage you to make new characters. If it takes me 100 hours to get one character to max level, or at least to, 70 or 80, wherever I think, like the end of the game is for me, I'm not going to come back every season. This is actually like antithetical to, I feel like, the style of game Diablo has become. Even Diablo 2, you can get to level 80, in 10 hours or something. Like, it doesn't take that long any longer. If you want to get to 99, it does, but in Diablo 2, the power difference between a level 80 and a 99 is way different than in Diablo 4, a level 80 and a level 100, because you get, so many Paragon points. And that Paragon point, increases your power so exponentially. So I really don't like this change. There's also some changes to increases to the experience you get from Tree of Whispers. I don't think that's a good, that doesn't make up for this here, because it's very hard to do nightmare dungeons and to farm the Tree of Whispers, because you can't pick what dungeons you're running. So very rarely do those two things line up. So most of the time, you're still going to be running these nightmare dungeons and not doing the Tree of Whispers. And they've also nerfed the overworld, which is actually, we're going to jump right into my second issue, which kind of ties into this experience change also. Okay, and my second issue here, and this kind of plays off of that last, experience nerf, is the world tier changes. So we'll look at this real. I'm not going to read through all of this, but level scaling inside dungeons and most overworld territories have been adjusted in World Tier 3 and 4. Monsters will begin trail behind the player up to a certain point, up to a max of 5 levels behind. It does not affect World Bosses, Legion events, Field of Hatreds, Helltide, Nightmare Dungeons. And this isn't a huge issue, like, as you're leveling up, World Tier 1, World Tier 3, World Tier 4. The real big problem I see is when I get to level 82. From this point onward, every enemy I fight outside of these, 5 events, is going to be 5 levels below me and essentially give no experience. Like, I think it's 0 or it's close to 0. Like, there's no point in fighting anything 5 levels below you. And I understand like how they came to this point. People were complaining that they didn't feel a sense of progression and getting stronger. And that kind of makes sense, like, as you get higher level in World Tier 3, and it's like the game's trying to push you into World Tier 4, okay, things start to trail behind you. There is no World Tier 5. From 82 onward, the entirety of the open world gameplay is pointless for me now. I'm like level 95 on my source, my main character. And essentially, the only things I can do to level up now are Nightmare Dungeons, Hell Tides, you know, Fields of Hatred, Legion events, world bosses. I can't go through like 90% of the open world. I can't participate in events. If I want to go back and do side quests, I'm not getting any experience for those really anymore. If I want to go back and find any little statues I missed, like there's no point for me to stop and do an event on the way or to fight anything. It's just a really baffling decision, and it feels like something that they would have put in place when they added World Tier 5. But as it is, at level 82, like the open world is just, there's no reason to interact or experience anything. If a buddy of mine is wanting to play with me, maybe he's level 60 and I'm going to, you know, help him do a couple of quests or something. There's no reason for me to go into the open world with him because I'm not getting any experience from it. So this is just another baffling one. And this also plays into like the Tree of Whispers changes. So Tree of Whispers gives more experience now. But most of the time, if you're wanting to focus on Tree of Whispers, you're not doing Nightmare Dungeons because you can't control, you know, what dungeon you're getting that you're getting provided, or what dungeon, you know, the Tree of Whispers providing. So like those two things very rarely line up. So most of the time, you're not doing both of those at the same time. I can't just do the Tree of Whisper dungeons because now they're level 77. Or, you know, at least they're 5 levels behind me at all times and giving me essentially no experience. And I can't do the overworld Tree of Whisper stuff because all those bosses, all those things I'm fighting and picking up, all those are going to be 5 levels below me. So, like, the fact that they buffed Tree of Whisper doesn't matter past 82 because all those enemies are essentially useless to fight. It's just a weird change. Like, I kind of see how they got here. But I feel like some of these changes were made by different teams or different individuals who are not communicating, and it's like this change really can't go into effect until Wood T5 comes into play, and it's like it's just very baffling at times, some of these changes. Okay, and my third major one, and this is somewhat going to play into the fact that I play a sorcerer primarily. And I feel like the sorcerer is not in a great place. And I was kind of hoping there might be some new items, those new uniques, the new aspects, something in there would excite me and be like, oh, that will complete my build, or that will open up some new gameplay area that wasn't available before. I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want to point out a couple that are just just terrible. Some of these may actually be useful. I'm not as familiar with the other classes to be able to really rate them. But coming down here, the Oculus. It's like, this is the first thing I read, actually. I pulled up this when the patch first got announced, when it first got posted. And I scrolled down, and the first time I read Sorcerer, I'm like, oh, the Oculus. I love that in Diablo 2. And, like, I just read this, and I immediately said, oh, no. This patch is going to be bad. That I got this far, and I read this, and immediately my mind was like, this is not what I was expecting. I just knew this was going to be a terrible patch just from this. And actually people have found this, and there are some niche ways that I think it could be effective. It can give you up to 15 levels of teleport, but it has like no damage on it. And the main effect of turning your evade into a random teleport, it's a nerf. And that's the biggest issue with a lot of the uniques, is I feel, I'm going to scroll down here if I can find it. So these are the 3 uniques, and I'm very familiar with the uniques on the Sorcerer. That's why I'm focusing on these in particular. I have an entire stash tab of just uniques on my Sorcerer. I've got duplicates of every non-Uber unique, and I've tried them all briefly, and I've put them all in my stash almost immediately afterwards, except for one, which is, of course, Raiments of the Infinite, which is a great item. Pretty much every other item is terrible, even with these changes. And this is kind of what I was hoping, like, hey, maybe they'll make the uniques not terrible. Like, you know, example, Gloves of the Illuminator. This before would reduce your fireball damage by between 60 and 75%, but it would let it bounce multiple times. And the idea is, well, hopefully it bounces 3-4 times on a single enemy or hits multiple enemies. In practice, it never really worked. Even if you get now the best roll of 55%, your fireball still has to hit the same enemy 3 times to do more damage than it would have previously, which is crazy. And not only that, you know, that the gloves are missing other key stats that would make you do more damage. So not only, like, most of these uniques have kind of terrible stat rolls on them, the power on it augments the ability, but it usually nerfs it in such a way that it's not usable. Like, I don't want any of these uniques to be necessarily best in slot for, like, the class overall. But if the item that impacts fireball is not usable by a fireball sorcerer, you have failed in this item. And coming down here, I'm not going to talk about Izu's, but Isadora's. I play a Chain Lightning sorcerer that is very focused around crackling energy. So I have tons of crackling energy. And this unique item, every time you pick up a crackling energy, it used to be 10%, now it goes up to 15%. There's a 15% chance to release a Lightning Nova that does, I think it's about 1,500 damage. Even if this was 100%, it would be a net loss of power to my character because I'm losing a ton of other useful stats. And the damage on it is very low. It's like, whoever's designing these, like, a 5% increase in the chance for this to trigger is not going to make it usable. If anything, if they change this item and just said, instead of crackling energy doing the Chain Lightning thing, now it does a big AoE effect, well, maybe I would use it then. But 90% of the time, you know, when I'm picking up crackling energies, it's like when the fight's over, you know, when there's no enemies around. And even if it's in the middle of battle, if I picked up 10 crackling energy, on average, I'm getting 1.5 Novas that deal 1,500 damage each. It's just terrible, even with these buffs. It's like, I don't know what they're thinking. And then the new aspects, I really, you know, none of them seemed that impactful. I'm just kind of disappointed. They nerfed a lot of aspects, and the new aspects are not that useful. And the uniques, again, out of all of the classes, there's what, maybe 5 usable uniques? It's ridiculous. They need to work on the itemization of uniques. And yeah, that's my next issue, is just the new items, the new aspects. Just kind of disappointing from my point of view. Okay, and my next 2 points are both about the overall nerfs to, not individual classes, not individual specs, just to the game overall. So this one, I want to talk about specifically the nerfs to the defensive aspects and the defensive capabilities of the player characters. The biggest one being aspect of disobedience. This had a pretty big nerf. I mean, this was used by almost everyone, but it's because it was kind of necessary. Blizzard has acknowledged that armor is more valuable than resistance right now. There's some bugs involving resistance and how it's calculated at the high end, and it's largely pointless to take or stack resistance, whereas armor, getting it above a certain level, is just kind of necessary to take on the higher nightmare dungeons. So what do? Well, they nerf a ton of armor capabilities without giving those needed fixes to resistance. Those aren't coming until Season 2 or later. So they've nerfed aspect of disobedience from 25 to 50% to 15 to 30%. So that's a pretty big difference. You used to be able to get a 50% increase, or if it was on an amulet, 75% increase on armor, and now it's capping out at 30, or would that be 45 on an amulet? Less than that, 30, 39, something like that. I can't do math in my head, but pretty big nerf on the armor that provides. And then, you know, scrolling down here, they talk about this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but and they specifically say, to chase this goal, we're shifting power to many offensive affixes from defensive affixes, which is weird because there are almost equal, if not more, offensive nerfs. So, like, in this paragraph, they talk about nerfing defense, but shifting power to be more offensive, but this patch overall has nerfed both. But right now, we're just talking about the defense. There's tons of armor reductions. Like, almost every damage reduction ability in the game has been reduced. You know, damage to distant enemies, close enemies, burning, chilled, poisoned, just straight up the total armor increases are reduced. Like, you're going to have less armor and less damage reduction after this patch. And this is coming from, I am a sorcerer player. I am 94 at this point. I'm doing dungeons that are about 10 levels higher than mine, or I was before this patch. And occasionally I was still getting one shot, even when I was taking like every single possible damage reduction. I was running the aspects to increase my armor. I was running 4 defensive abilities. I was running almost every single skill I could that would increase my survivability. And occasionally I would just be one shot by an arrow from off screen that I couldn't even see the enemy. I couldn't even see the arrow. I'm just alive, dead. If I stand on a poison cloud, if I stand on a fire, you know, if I in the hell tides, if a fire hits me, those almost all will come close to one-shotting me if I don't have my armor up. And it's just baffling. So, like, people were not saying that survivability, like this is not at the very high end an easy game. Lilith will one-shot you. Stuff in the higher nightmare tiers will one-shot you, especially if you're running a sorcerer who has broken resistance, you know, because she's an intelligent class instead of an armor class. And it's just baffling that, like, instead of waiting until when they fixed resistance, they're like, you know, we're going to make everyone 30% squishier. Screw you guys. That's, you know, I don't understand it. Like, it's, again, like I was saying, like, it almost feels like there's the guy over here who's fixing the resistance stuff, and the guy over here who's like, well, we got to balance armor. And, like, the one fix isn't there yet, but the armor guy's like, no, man, we gotta take armor down a peg. It's too good. And my final point here, and this is kind of the second half, that previous one was about nerfs to the defense, and this is really about the nerfs to the offensive capabilities of every class, every character, every build. I don't think there are many builds in this game that probably are not 20 to 30% weaker today than they were 2 days ago. And that's kind of disappointing going into, like, a new season. Like, pretty much every build across the board is just weaker with nothing to compensate for it. And they talk about, you know, affixes being too efficient, outshining alternatives, or looking to refine the outliers, improve numbers and choices. But all they did was they did the nerf part of that. They nerfed almost everything across the board, and they didn't buff many individual skills. They didn't buff, like, commensurate to that power loss. So overall, almost every build, every character, everything in the game is going to take longer. And I mean, these were big. I mean, we're going to go through this just quickly. All your core stats on weapons go from 50% to 25%. So that means you're probably not hitting a lot of the breakpoints now on your Paragon boards. You know, all of these cooldown reduction, imbuement skill reduction, trap skill cooldown, all the cooldown reductions have been reduced. And there's actually some things I'm finding that were not noted here. Like, all of my resources, like my sorcerer is based around having more than 100 energy. I've got 150 energy, or I did before this patch. Now I've got 138 of it, I think. Resources on items went down, even though that is not on this list of major nerfs. So, like, they've nerfed so much shit that they couldn't even document it all. It's crazy. You know, coming down here, critical strike damage reduced. Lightning critical strike damage reduced. Critical strike from everything reduced. Vulnerable damage reduced by 40%. And I'm going to stop here and just talk about critical strike and vulnerable. These were clearly, like, defining stats and were a little too powerful. I think the biggest problem is the way they did these changes. So you're playing on Wednesday before the patch came out, and then you jump on Wednesday night after the patches come out, and all of your items have, like, lost 30 to 40% of their stats. And you're like, I just spent the last month farming these because they were the effective stuff. And now you're saying it's all crap, and now I've got to go for different stats. And it's like, I really think they could have done this instead of reducing the numbers on the items. Fix the formulas in the back end, because this all comes down to, like, damage buckets, and, like, you know, you've got your weapons, your weapon is one bucket, your class stat, like intelligence, is another bucket, all of your plus damages, all of your multipliers, and then critical strike and vulnerable are another bucket. If they just maybe they added critical strike and vulnerable into one bucket instead of being two buckets. Now they're not separate multipliers. Maybe that would have been enough to even it out, or make them additive into the other. You know, like I'm not a genius at this stuff, but I feel like there are mechanical formula ways to do this, like behind the scenes, without straight up changing the numbers. You know, without reducing the numbers on the items. It's baffling how they did it, why they did it. Like, I understand those were kind of overpowered, but I feel like doing all of these reductions, offensive reductions, defensive reductions, lowering experience, all this stuff at once, it's just too much, especially right before a season that everyone was excited. Everyone wanted to check it out. Like, I think that's why the backlash has been so bad, is people have been waiting for this, and they're like waiting for the patch notes that went up, and like people immediately were like, wait a minute, there's not a single thing that makes me want to play the season. Like, Malignant Hearts are not enough to make me want to play. We'll keep going here. Critical Strike, all the inherent bonuses that were good have been reduced. Damage to crowd control enemies, like this is a big one that I stack on my source, decreased by 30%. And I actually got hit by the nerfs less than most, because I was not stacking vulnerable as much as a lot of people were. I was stacking critical and also the crowd control damage a lot, so I probably lost 20% of my damage, but some people, they lost a lot of damage. And then, like, there are some of these things that were increased. So flat physical damage, fire damage, cold damage, lightning damage, all of the additive bonuses were increased. But like vulnerable and critical strike were already making a bigger impact on the character than any of those stats. So taking 40% of a multiplicative bonus and then adding 25% of an additive bonus, are you going to have a net increase in power? Even if you redid all of your gear, even if instead of all vulnerable and critical, I said, I'm going to go just for lightning damage on my sorcerer, I would still be doing less damage because those are multiplicative and this is, additive damage. So it's a net, even if you like rebuilt your character from scratch, there is no way to be as powerful as you were 2 days ago. And like literally they've nerfed almost everything in the game. It's baffling. And I think what it comes down to it is Blizzard saw people buy the game, and they saw, not everyone, but you had your streamers and your no-lifers who were playing 24/7. And I don't mean that derogatorily. If you have the ability to play 24/7, more power to you. I wish I did. I'm a dad. I know that's the meme going around, but I play maybe, I don't know, 10 hours a week. And when the game came out, I took a couple days off, but week in and week out, I don't play all day. But what I think Blizzard saw is those people who are playing 24/7. And they hit 100 in 3 days, and they went like, whoa. So when the season comes out and it's 3 months long, and these people are all farming endgame after 3 days, what are we going to do? And instead of taking into consideration that 90% of the player base do not play like that. Like if you go to, the best way you can look at this is go to the PlayStation achievements, and you can see that like 75% of the player base has never stepped into a Helltide or a Nightmare dungeon. And I think it's something like 50% of the players have not beat Lilith at this point. Like, your average player is not one of those people who is getting to level 100 in 3 days. Your average player is probably the person like me who after 2 months is approaching level 100 and then saw that experience was nerfed by 20% and is basically like, you know what, I'm not going to get to 100, I don't think. In all these nerfs, I really think it's to slow down that season and to give them time to actually come up with endgame content, because like there's no world tier 5, there's no third tier of items. Like it really feels like they thought this all was going to take way longer, and that we are going to be fine doing Lilith statues and doing all of the quests over and over again. And in reality, people are like, no man, I want to farm world tier 5. Where's world tier 5 at? And yeah, I don't think they were quite expecting how fast people were going to burn through their content, that it took 5 years to build, and they decided they need to slow it down. And I think that's less fun. In the end, I think every time a patch comes out and they're making changes, they should go, is this game more or less fun than it was before? And overall, I think the game is less fun today than it was for me 2 days ago. And I don't see how the tools they've given me, like they haven't buffed things enough to balance this out. It's not like they made all these buffs and then they're like, you know what? No one uses Fireball. Let's add 30% to Fireball. No one uses Hydra. Like, there was a very minor Hydra buff, so that's kind of disingenuous. But the buff was so small, the people that were not using Hydra are probably not using Hydra today. Like, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, this patch could have had a ton of nerfs if there were enough exciting changes that you go, you know what? I finally want to go and try a lightning spear build. I'm going to do it. I'm going to see if I can make this work. There were not enough buffs. Like, pretty much the builds that were good 2 days ago are still the best builds. They're just 30% worse. The builds that were terrible 3 days ago are still terrible. They're just 30% more terrible. And it's just not exciting. I'm probably gonna play in the new season. I'm not going to play it like I was intending to, like I'm not taking time off work. I'm going to do it kind of on my own time. If Malignant Hearts are not exciting, I'm just going to drop it. Maybe I'll jump back in the next season. And this is coming from someone that's played every Diablo game. I've loved Diablo. Like, I've got hundreds of Diablo 2 videos on the channel. Like, I'm a huge Diablo and a huge Blizzard fan. And this patch just kind of deflated me completely. So I will have another video showing my high-level Chain Lightning Sorcerer and how that character has failed with the new patch. And yeah, if you get any thoughts, if I'm misinterpreting anything, if I'm missing something, please drop me a comment below. I would love to hear from you. And if you enjoy what I'm doing out there, please do like, subscribe, and just thank you for watching, everyone. I do appreciate it. Have a good night.